The alien civilization had always lived in peace, their world a delicate balance of advanced technology and natural beauty. Their cities floated above vast oceans of glowing liquid, and their structures seemed to merge seamlessly with the environment. They were intelligent, thoughtful beings who had mastered interstellar travel, communication, and energy manipulation, yet they had never faced a threat they could not handle until now. The planet itself had begun to betray them. Geological instability increased. Storms of unimaginable force swept across continents, and the very atmosphere started to thin in certain regions. The alien scientists worked tirelessly, trying to find a solution. But every plan they devised was thwarted by the sheer scale of the catastrophe. Their technology, which had once seemed invincible, now felt fragile against the natural forces they had always taken for granted. As the weeks passed, desperation began to settle in. Families huddled together in reinforced shelters. Children watched the sky with wide, fearful eyes, and the elderly whispered warnings of times past, telling stories of ancient disasters their ancestors had barely survived. The aliens had a deep respect for life and a profound understanding of the universe, but nothing in their history had prepared them for the relentless collapse happening around them. The oceans they had depended on for energy now roiled unpredictably, threatening to drown entire regions. The skies, once clear and filled with the dance of multiple suns and moons, were now streaked with deadly meteor showers and violent electromagnetic storms. Every day brought new dangers, and every night brought restless sleep filled with the terror of the unknown. Faced with extinction, the alien leaders convened in a council unlike any before. They debated endlessly, analyzing every possible option, from mass evacuation to attempting to stabilize the planet's core. But the reality was unavoidable. Their technology could only delay the inevitable. It could not prevent it. With heavy hearts, they realized that their survival depended on reaching out to beings beyond their own galaxy. The idea of sending an SOS, an urgent plea for help, was both simple and terrifying. It meant trusting that some other species existed, that they were benevolent, and that they would respond in time to save them. This was a gamble on a cosmic scale, a leap of faith that felt as dangerous as doing nothing at all. The aliens began crafting their message with meticulous care. Every word was chosen to convey their desperation without inciting fear or aggression. They emphasized their peaceful nature, their achievements in science and art, and their willingness to cooperate with any civilization that could help. They included detailed information about their planet, hoping it would allow any responders to understand the severity of the situation and act effectively. Despite their intelligence, they could not predict who might receive the message or how it would be interpreted. To them, this was simply a logical step, a necessary action to preserve their species. But the universe, vast and full of unknowns, had a way of twisting even the best-laid plans. Once the message was ready, the aliens transmitted it into deep space, sending it outward in all directions. They watched the signals propagate through the void, hoping that someone, somewhere, would answer. The act of sending the SOS gave them a fragile sense of hope, but it also carried a deep unease. They had never before reached beyond their own star system in such a desperate plea. It was an admission of vulnerability, a moment that exposed their fears to the unknown. Yet in that moment of vulnerability, there was also courage. They had acted despite uncertainty, choosing hope over despair. As the signal traveled, the aliens returned to their homes, watching the sky for signs of a response. Days passed, each longer and more anxious than the last. The storms continued to rage, and the ground shook beneath them, reminding them of the fragility of their existence. Families gathered, holding on to each other and sharing stories of resilience, finding comfort in their shared humanity, or in this case, shared alien nature. Scientists continued to monitor the SOS, analyzing any faint signals that might indicate a reply. The tension was palpable. Every anomaly in the sky, every strange energy reading, sparked hope and fear in equal measure. Little did they know, far beyond the reaches of their galaxy, an entirely different species had detected their distress signal. Unlike the aliens, this species did not interpret an SOS as a request for gentle assistance. In their eyes, any signal of distress was an opportunity to assess, dominate, and neutralize. The aliens, in their innocence and desperation, were unaware that the universe was watching them in a way they could not imagine. Their carefully crafted plea, meant to convey hope and peace, was about to bring consequences they could never have anticipated. Back on the planet, the aliens continued their daily struggle, maintaining a fragile semblance of normalcy. They repaired damaged structures, reinforced shelters, and attempted to calm the fearful populace. Leaders walked among the citizens, offering reassurance, though their own hearts were heavy with doubt. They spoke of survival, of unity, and of hope, trying to instill a sense of purpose in the face of chaos. The children, curious and resilient, asked questions about the stars, about who might answer their call and what it would mean for their future. These questions, simple yet profound, reminded the adults of the stakes of their actions. The SOS had been sent, and now all they could do was wait. The aliens understood that waiting was dangerous, but it was the only course available. They continued to prepare, not knowing what or who would arrive. Every passing moment heightened the tension. Every crack in the planet's surface, Every flash of lightning, every roar of the oceans reminded them of the fragility of their situation. Their hope was small but unyielding, a flicker of light in a world rapidly falling into darkness. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of space, the message traveled further and further, carrying the desperate plea of an entire civilization, unaware of the powerful and fearsome beings it would soon awaken. This moment, filled with anxiety, courage, and uncertainty, marked a turning point. The aliens had taken the boldest step in their history, reaching out across the universe, placing their fate in the hands of forces they could not see or understand. Their story was no longer just about survival on a dying planet. It had become about navigating the infinite unknown, facing consequences they could not imagine, and holding on to hope in a universe that was vast, indifferent, and full of surprises. In the quiet moments, as the planet trembled and the skies roared, the aliens stared upward, imagining the distant beings who might respond to their call. They did not know that their SOS meant to save them was about to set in motion a chain of events far beyond their control, one that would test their courage, intelligence, and unity in ways they could never have predicted. And in that tension, in that fragile hope, the story of their survival truly began. Days after the aliens had sent their desperate SOS into the void of space, they began noticing strange anomalies at the edges of their solar system. At first it was subtle, a faint distortion in the energy readings, a ripple in the usual flow of cosmic radiation, and unexplainable gravitational shifts. The scientists monitored these irregularities with growing unease, suspecting that some unknown force was approaching. Soon, these anomalies became undeniable. Massive shapes appeared on their long-range scanners, enormous ships, unlike anything they had ever encountered, moving with precision and overwhelming presence. The alien council convened immediately, fear and uncertainty rippling through the chamber. No signal, no message, nothing that could provide clarity accompanied these arrivals, only the stark, terrifying knowledge that something vast and powerful had entered their system. When the ships finally emerged fully into view, the aliens were struck by a mixture of awe and terror. The Deathworlders' fleet was colossal, dwarfing anything the alien civilization had ever built. Each vessel was an engineering marvel, bristling with weaponry, energy shields, and mysterious technologies that the aliens could not fully understand. The fleet moved in perfect synchrony, a silent testament to their efficiency and power. The alien citizens, watching from observation decks and city streets, could barely comprehend the sheer scale of the arrival. Panic began to spread like wildfire. Children clung to their parents, elders whispered prayers and old legends, and leaders scrambled to issue orders and maintain calm. The situation was unprecedented. The aliens had expected assistance, not an overwhelming presence that seemed to fill the sky and dominate the horizon. The Deathworlders did not communicate immediately. There were no diplomatic signals, no cautious scanning attempts to establish friendly contact. Instead, their presence alone conveyed a message of authority and dominance. The aliens, in their desperation, had assumed that a plea for help would bring benevolent forces, intelligent negotiators, or scientific experts capable of providing rescue strategies. They had never imagined that their SOS would summon beings for whom the concept of help was inseparable from displays of overwhelming power. The alien council debated furiously, trying to interpret the intentions of these newcomers. Were they saviors, judges, or destroyers? Every hypothesis carried potentially catastrophic consequences. The initial interactions, though limited, were tense. The aliens attempted to communicate through their standard interstellar protocols, sending messages of peace, clarification, and explanation. They detailed their predicament, the state of their planet, and their need for assistance. But the Deathworlders did not respond in a conventional manner. They conducted scans of the planet, deploying automated units and energy probes, not in a hostile fashion, but in a manner that the aliens interpreted as threatening. Every movement by the Deathworlders was precise and intimidating, a display of control rather than cooperation. Fear gripped the alien population. Their SOS, meant to signal hope, seemed to have invited a force beyond their comprehension. Amid the growing panic, alien scientists and strategists worked feverishly to understand what they were facing. They studied the fleet's movement patterns, energy emissions, and deployment strategies. The aliens realized that the Deathworlders were assessing them not with aggression, but with strict and cold calculation. Every scan, every positioning maneuver was part of a larger evaluation. The aliens began to understand that their civilization was now under scrutiny, that the slightest misstep could provoke a catastrophic response. Families were evacuated from vulnerable areas, emergency shelters were reinforced, and all communication channels were opened to prepare for possible worst-case scenarios. Yet, amidst the fear, there was a spark of author. Alien scientists could not deny the brilliance of the fleet's design and the sheer discipline of its operation. Meanwhile, citizens struggled to comprehend the enormity of the situation. Street markets closed, schools suspended lessons, and entire neighborhoods became makeshift observation points. Parents explained as best they could to frightened children, offering reassurances while hiding their own uncertainty. Elders recounted tales of ancient explorers who had once ventured into space, reminding the younger generations that courage and intellect were the keys to survival. The aliens' cultural response to crisis: community solidarity, intellectual problem-solving, and emotional support became a vital lifeline. Despite the overwhelming odds, they continued to hope that reason, communication, and resilience could bridge the gap between themselves and these unknown visitors. The alien leaders tried multiple communication methods, from visual projections to quantum-encoded messages. They sent detailed records of their planetary systems, chemical compositions, and environmental stability. Each message emphasized their peaceful nature and willingness to comply with any reasonable demands. The Deathworlders, however, maintained a strict silence, a non-negotiable protocol that left the aliens anxious and confused. The realization dawned slowly: this was not a conventional rescue operation. In the Deathworlders' perspective, an SOS was not an invitation to diplomacy, it was a signal to evaluate, control, and, if necessary, neutralize potential risks. The aliens' careful wording, designed to convey humility and cooperation, had inadvertently triggered a display of calculated power. As the hours passed, the alien planet transformed into a tense landscape of vigilance. Airships patrolled the skies, communication arrays hummed continuously, and emergency signals were prepared to alert the population of any changes. The Council met constantly, analyzing every observable detail of the Deathworlder fleet. Each movement, each emission of energy, each scanning pattern was dissected for meaning. They discovered that the fleet's positioning around the planet was strategic, creating zones of influence that prevented the aliens from freely moving critical resources. It was a silent demonstration of authority, a lesson in patience and power. Every moment heightened the fear, but also increased the aliens' determination to survive. Despite the overwhelming presence of the Deathworlders, not all hope was lost. The alien engineers began developing contingency plans, creating decoys, camouflage systems, and emergency protocols designed to minimize risk while the visitors conducted their assessments. Citizens were trained in basic survival techniques, shelters were reinforced with advanced energy shields, and emergency communication protocols were established to maintain order. The entire civilization became a hive of activity, balancing fear with preparation, despair with ingenuity. This collective response, born of necessity, showcased the aliens' adaptability, intelligence, and commitment to survival even in the face of incomprehensible power. The alien leaders also began to reflect on the nature of their SOS. They realized that, in their desperation, they had underestimated the consequences of reaching out beyond their known universe. Their message, crafted with hope and caution, had been interpreted through a lens entirely alien to their understanding. It was a lesson in humility, an awakening to the unpredictable nature of cosmic civilizations, and a reminder that intentions alone cannot control outcomes. The Council communicated this insight to their people, urging patience, caution, and continued vigilance while reaffirming that unity and intelligence were their greatest assets. As days turned into nights, the Deathworlders' presence remained unwavering. The aliens adapted to the tension, establishing routines that allowed life to continue under extraordinary conditions. Observatories operated around the clock, monitoring the fleet, while schools, though partially closed, began teaching survival strategies alongside traditional knowledge. Social structures shifted subtly, with communal decision-making and shared responsibilities becoming central to daily life. Fear remained, but it was tempered by the knowledge that preparedness, observation, and strategic thinking could provide a fighting chance. In this phase of the crisis, the aliens began to understand the depth of the challenge before them. They were facing not just a natural disaster, but a cultural and existential test imposed by a species far beyond their comprehension. Every interaction, every silence from the Deathworlders, every calculated movement of the fleet was a lesson in patience, strategy, and resilience. The aliens learned to think in new ways, combining their advanced technology with psychological insight, predicting patterns, and preparing for eventualities they had never imagined. Their world had changed irrevocably, but they had not surrendered. And so, the alien civilization endured, poised between fear and hope, observing the massive fleet that had arrived in response to their SOS. The presence of the Deathworlders was a reminder of the vastness of the universe, the unpredictability of its inhabitants, and the fine line between survival and destruction. The aliens understood that their fate depended not only on the power of the beings that had arrived but also on their own courage, intelligence, and unity. In the tension and uncertainty, a deeper strength emerged, one that would shape the next phase of their struggle for survival and illuminate the extraordinary challenges of contacting life beyond their own world. The aliens quickly realized that the situation was far more complicated than they had ever imagined. At first, they had believed that their SOS would bring aid a fleet of peaceful, helpful beings who could provide guidance, technology, or even evacuation assistance. They had prepared for this possibility, imagining conversations, negotiations, and collaborations. But now, as the massive Deathworlder fleet maintained its position above their planet, it became painfully clear that their assumptions had been wrong. The behavior of the Deathworlders did not resemble help or diplomacy. Every movement of the fleet, every deployment of scanning drones, and every calculated orbital adjustment suggested something entirely different. The aliens began to grasp the horrifying reality in Deathworlder culture. An SOS was not interpreted as a request for aid, but as a signal that a civilization needed to be assessed, controlled, and, if necessary, neutralized. Panic spread quickly among the population. Citizens had already been living under the stress of natural disasters on their own planet, but now the presence of a nearly incomprehensible external force magnified their fear tenfold. Children cried, families huddled together in shelters, and communities that had relied on daily routines were now paralyzed with anxiety. The alien leaders tried to maintain calm, issuing carefully worded communications to explain that the Deathworlders' behavior, while intimidating, did not necessarily mean immediate attack. However, the words felt hollow even to those delivering them. The fleet's silent dominance was a constant reminder that their world was no longer under their own control. The familiar patterns of life had been shattered, replaced by uncertainty and the ever-present threat of catastrophe. Scientists and engineers scrambled to understand the Deathworlders' technology and behavior. They observed the fleet carefully, taking note of energy patterns, the paths of drones, and the structure of the ships themselves. Every detail was analyzed, every anomaly recorded. They attempted to communicate again, sending signals explaining their peaceful intentions and their desperate need for help. But the Deathworlders did not respond in ways that the aliens could interpret as dialogue. Instead, they executed maneuvers that seemed threatening, yet were actually standard operational procedures in their culture. The aliens gradually realized that every move they had interpreted as hostile was part of a systematic evaluation. This revelation brought both relief and dread. Relief that there was no immediate intent to destroy them, but dread at the strict, unyielding nature of the assessment process. Amid this tense situation, the aliens' internal society began to change. Ordinary citizens who had once focused solely on their own lives now found themselves part of a collective effort to survive. Neighborhoods organized patrols, monitoring for changes in the Deathworlder fleet. Engineers volunteered to create protective measures, while scientists worked on decoding patterns that might indicate the visitors' intentions. The society as a whole became a living, breathing network of vigilance and strategy. Even the youngest citizens were educated on emergency protocols, taught how to recognize the signs of imminent danger, and trained to follow instructions swiftly. The crisis forced the entire civilization to function with unprecedented coordination and unity. Despite the terror and confusion, moments of ingenuity and bravery began to emerge. Teams of scientists and engineers developed cloaking systems and energy shields to obscure critical areas from the fleet's scanners. Drones and decoys were designed to divert attention from sensitive regions, buying the aliens precious time. Communication protocols were refined to prevent misunderstandings, while contingency plans were drafted for evacuation and survival if worst-case scenarios unfolded. Every small success in these efforts brought a surge of hope. The aliens realized that while the Deathworlders' presence was overwhelming, their own adaptability, intelligence, and collective will could provide them with a chance to endure. The alien leaders also had to confront the implications of their own actions. They had sent the SOS with hope and faith, believing that any response would be an opportunity for salvation. But their innocent plea had brought them face to face with one of the most feared species in the universe. The leaders understood that survival now depended not only on technology and strategy but on psychological insight and understanding a culture entirely alien to their own. Every signal they sent, every movement they made, had to be carefully considered. Any misstep could provoke a catastrophic reaction. They began to study the fleet's behavior not as a threat alone, but as a complex system with patterns that could, if understood correctly, guide their own actions. Fear, however, remained a constant companion. The citizens of the planet lived in a state of perpetual tension. Nights were filled with anxious waiting, listening for the slightest sound or vibration that might indicate action from the fleet. Children, though educated in protocols, still cried out in confusion and fear, while parents struggled to maintain composure. The natural disasters that had plagued the planet continued in parallel with this new existential threat, amplifying the sense of hopelessness. Yet, in the midst of terror, a remarkable resilience began to surface. Communities supported each other emotionally, sharing resources and knowledge. Acts of courage, no matter how small, were celebrated. The aliens learned to draw strength from each other in ways they had never fully realized before. Communication efforts continued despite the difficulty. The aliens sent detailed data about their planet's condition, energy sources, and population distributions, hoping to demonstrate that they were not. Every message was crafted with care, balancing the need to convey urgency with the necessity of remaining non-confrontational. But the Deathworlders' silence was a constant challenge, leaving the aliens to interpret actions rather than words. Every scan, every adjustment in fleet positioning had to be analyzed, with leaders and scientists debating the implications late into the alien night. The process was exhausting and stressful, but it also sharpened the aliens' problem-solving skills, forcing them to think with unprecedented precision and creativity. As the days passed, the aliens' understanding deepened. They recognized that the Deathworlders operated with logic and discipline that was alien to their own experience. In the visitors' view, survival and control were paramount, and every interaction was part of a meticulous assessment. The aliens began to adjust their own behavior accordingly, moving cautiously, avoiding sudden actions, and anticipating possible interpretations of every gesture. They became highly self-aware, constantly evaluating the impact of their choices on an audience they could barely understand. This period of observation and adaptation was exhausting but crucial. It allowed the aliens to navigate a path that minimized risk while buying time for potential solutions. The alien scientists also realized that their understanding of technology and strategy had to evolve. They had previously relied on their own advanced knowledge, assuming it would suffice against natural and technological challenges. Now they faced a civilization whose technological and tactical capabilities were beyond their comprehension. They began experimenting with innovative approaches, combining traditional methods with new ideas inspired by the challenge at hand. Simulations were run, contingency strategies developed, and unconventional solutions tested. Every failure provided valuable lessons, and every success strengthened the aliens' confidence that they could survive, even under extreme scrutiny. Despite the uncertainty and fear, the alien population did not succumb to despair. The crisis fostered a sense of unity, purpose, and resilience. Citizens, engineers, scientists, and leaders collaborated in ways previously unimaginable, each contribution critical to the survival of the whole. They learned to endure, to hope, and to act with precision even when the consequences of mistakes were potentially catastrophic. The presence of the Deathworlders had transformed their society, revealing strengths and capabilities that had remained dormant until tested by extraordinary circumstances. Through all of this, the aliens became painfully aware of the delicate balance between action and inaction. Every decision carried immense weight, as the Deathworlders' silence left room for interpretation and potential danger. The aliens understood that their survival depended on observation, careful planning, and restraint. Panic had to be managed, resources allocated wisely, and every response calculated. It was a tense, exhausting, and emotionally charged phase, but one that forged a new sense of resilience and intelligence within the alien civilization. The aliens came to a profound realization. Their SOS, meant to seek help and hope, had brought them face to face with a force beyond their understanding. Yet, through observation, adaptation, and unity, they began to navigate this unprecedented challenge. They understood that survival in the universe required not only intelligence and technology but also patience, insight, and the ability to learn from every interaction. The experience marked a turning point in their history, shaping their civilization's approach to danger, communication, and the unknown. It was a harsh lesson in the unpredictability of life and the importance of resilience, but it also revealed the remarkable capacity of the aliens to endure, adapt, and survive against overwhelming odds. The aliens had been under the silent scrutiny of the Deathworlders for days now, and the tension had reached its peak. Fear and uncertainty had become constant companions, but the alien leaders knew that they could not simply wait passively. The survival of their civilization depended on action, on clever thinking, and on making use of everything they had learned about the mysterious fleet. They realized that brute force would never be an option. The Deathworlders were far too powerful for any direct confrontation. Instead, they needed to rely on ingenuity, strategy, and an intimate understanding of their own planet. It was a desperate situation, but it also presented an opportunity to test their resilience and resourcefulness like never before. Immediately, the alien engineers and scientists began to develop survival strategies tailored to the unique characteristics of their planet. They've studied the geography, energy patterns, and natural resources to determine how best to shield critical areas from the Deathworlders' scans. Underground cities, previously used for storage or research, were converted into protective shelters for civilians. Energy cloaks were devised to mask vital installations, and holographic decoys were deployed to mislead the fleet's observation drones. Every action was calculated to confuse, delay, or divert attention without provoking aggression. This was not a battle of weapons, but a battle of wits, strategy, and adaptability. And every citizen played a role in the collective effort. At the same time, the alien leaders had to maintain calm among the population. Panic was spreading, as people struggled to understand the intentions of the visitors above. Children asked frightening questions, elders whispered anxious stories from the past, and citizens debated whether the SOS had been a mistake. Leaders traveled from settlement to settlement, giving speeches, offering reassurance, and providing clear instructions on safety protocols. They emphasized that survival depended on unity, discipline, and courage, while fear could paralyze them. Careful planning and cooperation could create opportunities for survival. The alien society was learning to function under extreme pressure, with every individual contributing to the protection and resilience of the whole civilization. Scientists also began exploring ways to communicate more effectively with the Deathworlders. Despite the challenges posed by their silence, They hypothesized that subtle patterns of light, energy fluctuations, or even movement could be interpreted as signals by the fleet. Teams experimented with creating visual codes in quantum pulses, hoping that even small gestures could convey their peaceful intentions. Every attempt was a mix of hope and anxiety, for they had no guarantee that their efforts would be understood. Yet, the mere act of trying empowered them, reminded the citizens that they were not powerless and that intelligence and creativity could influence the situation in ways that raw fear could not. Meanwhile, the civilian population adapted to life under the watchful presence of the Deathworlders. Daily routines changed dramatically. Citizens moved cautiously, avoiding high-risk areas and following strict safety protocols. Schools and workplaces integrated emergency procedures into normal activities, teaching everyone from the youngest children to the oldest elders how to respond to potential threats. Families organized themselves to maintain communication and mutual support, while community leaders coordinated local resources to ensure that everyone had access to necessities. The planet became a network of prepared, vigilant communities, all working in harmony to reduce the risk posed by an unknowable force above. The alien engineers did not limit their efforts to defense alone. They also focused on developing mobility and flexibility. Small, agile vehicles capable of rapid deployment were created to transport critical personnel and resources safely. Subterranean tunnels were expanded, linking key facilities in ways that allowed for stealthy movement and quick evacuation if needed. Energy shields were strengthened around vital installations, and temporary decoys were designed to mislead the Deathworlders' senses. Every action was guided by the principle that survival required adaptation, anticipation, and constant vigilance. The aliens were learning to turn their fear into strategic advantage, using every tool at their disposal to maintain control over what little they could influence. As the days turned into weeks, the aliens' understanding of the Deathworlders deepened. They observed patterns in the fleet's movement and scanning, noting the timing, intervals, and intensity of energy pulses. Every piece of information was analyzed and shared among the scientific and leadership councils. These insights allowed the aliens to predict potential movements and respond proactively, reducing the risk of accidental provocation. By studying their observers, the aliens began to regain a sense of agency. They could not challenge the fleet directly, but they could navigate the space under its watchful presence with intelligence, caution, and calculated precision. Even amidst these technical and strategic efforts, the emotional toll on the alien population was immense. Anxiety, fatigue, and fear were constant companions, and the stress of living under continuous observation was exhausting. Families worried about the safety of loved ones, children struggled to sleep, and elders reflected on the fragility of their civilization. Leaders recognized that morale was as important as technological innovation. They organized gatherings, storytelling sessions, and cultural activities designed to strengthen communal bonds and remind the citizens of their resilience and shared purpose. Emotional endurance became as critical as strategic planning in the struggle for survival. In the midst of these challenges, extraordinary acts of courage and ingenuity emerged. Scientists worked tirelessly, often through exhaustion and fear, to develop protective systems and contingency plans. Engineers risked exposure to dangerous areas to maintain and deploy critical infrastructure. Ordinary citizens assisted in evacuations, repairs, and surveillance, demonstrating a remarkable spirit of solidarity and resourcefulness. The planet, once a collection of isolated communities and individuals, transformed into a highly coordinated network of people, united by the shared goal of survival. The crisis had forged a new strength within the society, one born from necessity, intelligence, and courage. The alien leaders also had to contend with the unpredictability of natural disasters that continued to ravage their planet. Storms, seismic activity, and environmental instability compounded the challenges posed by the Deathworlders' presence. Resources were strained, and every protective measure required careful calculation to ensure that it could withstand both natural and external threats. The aliens' ability to multitask, adapt, and respond creatively under pressure became a crucial component of their survival strategy. The combination of natural hazards and cosmic scrutiny created a uniquely complex crisis that tested every facet of their society. Through careful observation, strategic planning, and relentless effort, the aliens began to regain some measure of control. They learned to anticipate the Deathworlders' actions, to protect their critical infrastructure, and to maintain civilian morale under extreme pressure. Small successes evading scans, preserving vital resources, or ensuring the safety of a vulnerable community provided crucial encouragement. These victories, though minor in comparison to the magnitude of the threat, reinforced the belief that survival was possible through intelligence, cooperation, and adaptability. Despite the challenges, the alien civilization began to demonstrate remarkable resilience. Every member of society contributed to the collective effort, from scientists and engineers to children and elders. Fear was ever present, but it was tempered by hope, ingenuity, and unity. They realized that survival depended not only on technology or strategy but also on emotional endurance and social cohesion. Each challenge, each obstacle, strengthened the bonds between citizens and reinforced the shared commitment to endure against overwhelming odds. The aliens had transformed their planet into a highly adaptive, strategic, and resilient society. They had learned to navigate the presence of a far superior and enigmatic force through intelligence, observation, and unity. Their technological innovations, emergency protocols, and social cohesion allowed them to survive under conditions that would have been unimaginable before the arrival of the Deathworlders. The crisis had revealed their strengths, tested their limits, and forged a new understanding of what it meant to endure in the face of an overwhelming threat. The experience left the alien leaders with a profound insight. Survival was never guaranteed, but it could be achieved through courage, creativity, and collective effort. They understood that they had to continue adapting, anticipating, and learning from every interaction with the Death. The presence of the fleet, initially a source of terror and despair, had become a catalyst for growth, innovation, and unity. The aliens had faced one of the greatest challenges in their history and had survived not through raw power, but through intelligence, cooperation, and resilience. The alien civilization reached a turning point. They were no longer passive victims of circumstance. They had become active participants in their own survival. By combining strategic thinking, technological innovation, emotional endurance, and social unity, they had carved out a space for themselves in the shadow of a formidable force. The lessons learned during this period would shape the future of their society, influencing how they approached threats, communication, and the unknown. And in the quiet moments, as they watched the Deathworlders fleet above, they understood that survival was possible not because of luck, but because of courage, intelligence, and the unbreakable bonds of their civilization. The alien civilization had endured days and weeks under the overwhelming presence of the Deathworlders, and now the moment of truth was approaching. Every citizen, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, had learned to live with constant vigilance, fear, and the need for quick, precise action. Their entire society had transformed into a highly coordinated system of observation, preparation, and adaptation. Even amidst exhaustion, they had discovered remarkable resilience within themselves, a strength born of necessity, intelligence, and unity. Yet, despite all their preparation, they could not predict what the Deathworlders would do next. The fleet remained, silent and imposing, hovering above the planet, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. The aliens had learned to survive under scrutiny, but they could not control the ultimate outcome. For weeks, the Deathworlders conducted their systematic scans and assessments. Every movement, every energy pulse, every minor adjustment in their orbital positions was a test, a measure of the aliens' capabilities, intentions, and resilience. The aliens had learned to interpret these actions carefully, but the sheer scale and discipline of the fleet made prediction difficult. Still, the alien scientists and strategists remained vigilant. They monitored patterns, recorded observations, and adjusted their defenses continuously. The planet became a hive of activity, with communities working in perfect coordination to ensure that no critical resource was exposed and that civilians remained safe. Every success, no matter how small, reinforced their determination to survive. Despite their fear, the aliens began to notice subtle changes. The Deathworlders' fleet, after days of strict surveillance, seemed to slow its aggressive movements. The scanning drones no longer hovered constantly over critical regions, and some patrol patterns became more predictable. Scientists hypothesized that the assessment phase might be nearing completion. The leaders held tense meetings, debating whether this was a sign of goodwill, a calculated pause, or simply part of the Deathworlders' standard procedure. The uncertainty was exhausting, but it also brought a flicker of cautious hope that the aliens understood that survival had never been guaranteed. Yet they had endured long enough to potentially reach the next stage of this unprecedented encounter. Communication attempts continued, though they were now tempered by patience and careful observation. The aliens sent signals reiterating their peaceful intentions, their lack of threat to the broader universe, and their willingness to cooperate fully with any reasonable expectations. They included detailed information about their planet's population, energy systems, and critical resources, hoping that transparency would demonstrate their non-hostile nature. They knew that words alone could not guarantee safety, but communication was still a tool, one more means of influencing an outcome that remained largely beyond their control. Each message was crafted with painstaking precision, reflecting both hope and caution. Meanwhile, the civilian population continued to adjust to life under the shadow of the Deathworlders. Children, though still fearful, learned new skills and emergency protocols. Adults maintained routines that balanced preparation with daily survival needs. Communities had developed intricate systems of mutual support, ensuring that no one was left vulnerable. Despite the stress and fatigue, the alien civilization had become remarkably cohesive, demonstrating that even under extreme pressure, cooperation and solidarity could flourish. The presence of the Deathworlders had forced them to evolve, not only technologically and strategically, but socially and emotionally as well. Then, finally, a shift occurred. After weeks of observation, the Deathworlders began to withdraw. Their fleet moved outward, slowly, systematically, as though they had completed their evaluation. The aliens watched in a mixture of awe, relief, and lingering apprehension. There had been no dramatic confrontation, no final judgment, no sudden catastrophe, only a quiet, deliberate withdrawal. The aliens did not yet fully understand why the Deathworlders had left, but they instinctively knew that they had survived. Their strategies, ingenuity, and resilience had been sufficient to withstand the scrutiny of a species far beyond their own comprehension. It was a victory of intelligence and endurance over fear and uncertainty in the immediate aftermath. The aliens experienced a complex mix of emotions. Relief swept through the population, yet it was tempered by lingering anxiety. Citizens reflected on the sheer scale of the challenge they had faced, marveling at the discipline, power, and intelligence of the Deathworlders. At the same time, they celebrated their own achievements, the collective effort, the courage, and the ingenuity that had allowed them to endure. Families reunited, communities shared stories of bravery and quick thinking, and leaders began to assess what lessons could be drawn from the experience. The aliens understood that survival was not just about outlasting natural disasters or technological challenges, but about enduring the unpredictable and often incomprehensible forces of the wider universe. The alien leaders convened to analyze the event and to extract lessons for the future. They understood that their SOS, though born of desperation and hope, had triggered an interaction with one of the most powerful species in existence. This realization brought both humility and wisdom. They recognized that interstellar communication required an understanding not only of technology and language, but also of cultural norms and perceptions entirely different from their own. In the future, they would need to be cautious, prepared, and adaptable when reaching out to unknown civilizations. Yet, the experience had also proven their capacity to survive, to adapt, and to endure against overwhelming odds. Across the planet, the aliens began to rebuild their routines. Emergency shelters were deactivated gradually, and critical operations returned to normal while still maintaining lessons learned during the crisis. Children returned to schools, though lessons now included survival and crisis management. Scientists continued research into planetary stabilization, drawing inspiration from the extraordinary challenge they had just faced. Communities reinforced the bonds formed during the ordeal, ensuring that social cohesion remained strong. The alien civilization had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. The experience had transformed them, not only in terms of survival skills but in their understanding of courage, cooperation, and the limits of knowledge. In the days that followed, stories of bravery and ingenuity spread throughout the planet. Citizens recounted tales of quick thinking, successful decoys, and acts of courage that had ensured the safety of neighborhoods or critical installations. These stories became part of the culture, a reminder of the resilience and determination that had carried the civilization through one of the greatest challenges in its history. Children learned from these stories, not only about fear and danger, but also about hope, intelligence, and the power of collective effort. The crisis had left a lasting mark, shaping the identity of the civilization for generations to come. The aliens also reflected on the nature of the death. Though initially terrifying, the experience had revealed much about their approach to the universe. The fleet's assessment, while silent and imposing, had ultimately respected the boundaries of non-threat and The aliens realized that even in encounters with forces vastly superior to themselves, intelligence, strategy, and cooperation could create pathways to survival. They understood that power alone did not dictate outcomes. Thoughtful, adaptive action could influence even the most formidable observers. This insight reshaped their approach to interstellar relations, fostering a cautious but informed respect for the unknown. As weeks turned into months, the alien civilization slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. They continued to repair damage caused by natural disasters, improve planetary defenses, and strengthen communication networks. Yet, the experience with the Deathworlders remained ever present in their collective memory. It was a lesson in humility, in the unpredictable nature of the universe, and in the extraordinary capacities of their own civilization. They had faced one of the most feared species in existence and survived through intelligence, adaptability, and unity. The knowledge of their endurance became a source of pride and inspiration, shaping how they viewed themselves and their place in the galaxy. In the end, the aliens had survived not because of luck or chance, but because of their courage, intelligence, and determination. Their society had been tested in ways they could never have anticipated, and they had emerged stronger and wiser. The SOS, intended as a plea for help, had unintentionally summoned one of the most powerful forces in the universe. Yet, through careful observation, strategic planning, and collective effort, the aliens had not only survived but had learned valuable lessons about resilience, adaptability, and the complex nature of interstellar interactions. The incident became a defining moment in the history of their civilization. It was a story of fear, courage, strategy, and survival, demonstrating the extraordinary capacity of a society to endure under extreme circumstances. The aliens understood that the universe was vast, unpredictable, and full of challenges beyond comprehension. But they also knew that within themselves lay the power to face those challenges, adapt to the unknown, and survive even against forces far greater than their own. Their ordeal with the Deathworlders became a legend, a tale of survival and intelligence that would inspire future generations to approach the unknown with courage, wisdom, and unity. And so, life on the planet continued, forever changed. The aliens rebuilt, adapted, and grew stronger, carrying forward the lessons of endurance, cooperation, and the unpredictable nature of the universe. They had survived what seemed impossible, emerging not only intact but wiser, more resilient, and deeply aware of the delicate balance between hope, intelligence, and action. Their SOS had backfired in the most unexpected way. Yet it had also revealed the extraordinary strength of their civilization, a strength that would endure for generations to come.